A young girl is sent to a mental hospital for an extreme treatment and is whisked away by a storm to a hellish, fantastical landscape where she encounters disturbing creatures and restores its rightful ruler to power. In another film, a young woman is sent to a mental hospital where she solves a puzzle that opens a gateway to hell where she encounters sexy creatures and barely escapes with the help of another patient. What could Walter Murch's Return to Oz and Tony Randall's Hellbound Hellraiser 2 have in common? That is what we are talking about in this episode of The Celluloid Mirror.
I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? Well, you're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on,
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest one of all?
Look at these lies.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Even if one of them survives,
the only way to stop him is to make another movie.
Welcome to the Celluloid Mirror. I am one of your hosts, Sean Mannion.
And I am Nicole Solomon, the other one of your hosts. And on the Celluloid Mirror, we take two films and look at what they reflect about one another, the audience, and our culture at large. Today we are talking about Tony Randall's Hellbound Hellraiser 2 and Walter Murch's Return to Oz.
We'll start by giving a brief synopsis of each film, discuss our response to the films, critical response to them, and then dive in on what the films say about each other. But before that, Nicole, did you know that there's somebody else on this Zoom call?
There's somebody else in this Zoom call?
Yeah, it's not just me and you. Did you see?
The ghost in the Zoom call? No,
we have a guest.
We have a guest?
We have a guest. Isn't it exciting? Are you excited that we have a guest?
Oh my goodness, somebody is joining us. Somebody is joining us today. And do you know who it is? It is Annie Rose Malamet.
Hi.
Annie Rose.
Hi, Annie.
We are so happy to see you. We
are
used
very
to see
happy
you in
to see you.
Brooklyn, and now we only see you in internet space.
Yes.
Annie Rose Malamet is an internationally recognized lesbian vampire expert, freelance film writer, and perverted aesthete. Did I pronounce that correctly? We don't know. Aesthete.
But it's fine.
Thank you. No, thank you. I feel better now. She is the creator of the popular podcast Girls, Guts and Giallo, where she examines controversial and subversive cinema through the lens of queer leather and sex work history and sensibilities. Annie has lectured and presented work at festivals and colleges in both the United States and Europe. Her essays and reviews have appeared in various publications such as Cultured Magazine, Sissy Screens, Into Magazine, and Autostraddle.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. We just had a really long catch-up discussion, and Sean and Nicole and I used to be co-workers, and now I'm catatonic in California. So that's kind of the conclusion that we reached.
You know, and if people want, like, you know, from this episode, if they haven't already listened to Girls, Guts and Giallo, which really the chances are more likely that they've listened to Annie and not us before, because she's much more popular than we are.
For good reason.
For good reason. But she does have a two-parter on the first Hellraiser movie. So if they like this discussion, they may very much well like that one as well. I certainly
liked
did.
it.
I have a few notes on it. No. As a fellow Hellraiser obsessive, I have.
No, it was fantastic. It was a fantastic deep dive. It's what I want when I want to hear people talking about Hellraiser. So,
and Tina is such a good guest.
She was fantastic. It was wonderful to hear the two of you working together to break down this classic text that obviously meant a lot to both Sean and myself.
Yeah. Obviously, it meant a lot to me too.
Yeah.
Yes. As for those who don't see the Zoom call, which, you know, you got to be on our respective Patreons to see the Zoom video. Annie has a whole wall of stuff.
Yeah.
You might want to think about what that stuff is, or what that could be.
And your own life choices that led you to not seeing it, if that is the case for you. Because things could be different.
Life could be so much more full and leathery. So we should probably tell people about what the synopsis size these films.
I guess we didn't divvy up who's synopsizing which.
We didn't do that. We're bad about doing that. Annie, would you? I know you just watched Return to Oz because you were tweetering about it. Would you like to tell people about what happens in Return to Oz? You can be as accurate as you feel like.
So in Return to Oz, Fairuza Balk plays Dorothy from the first Wizard of Oz movie. It takes place at the turn of the century, right? Like the year 1900 is about to happen. And Dorothy is, talking about her journey in Oz, and her aunt and uncle think she's gone mad and take her to a doctor, an old-timey quack who wants to electroshock her visions out of her. And she ends up, there's some kind of storm that happens, right, in the mental hospital. A young girl comes to her and takes her back to Oz, where she sees that it's completely dilapidated, abandoned, has just been taken over by a witch and her like evil minions called the Wheelers. And she goes on a journey with her new friends to free Oz, essentially. And there's a lot of like claymation and puppets, and it's really a freaky little movie. Excellent. Yeah, the Wheelers still creep me out a lot. They're genuinely scary.
They are. They are.
I didn't expect when I watched it again as an adult to be creeped out by them, but I was.
There's a lot in that film. Hey, Sean, do you want to talk about Hellbound, and then I'll talk about the connections, just because I know you watched it more recently than I did?
Sure, I'll talk about Hellbound. So Hellbound picks up right after the first Hellraiser movie, and if you're unaware of what happens in the first Hellraiser movie, it shows you most of the first Hellraiser movie at the beginning of Hellbound.
Yeah.
Like there's a good 15 minutes of Hellraiser 2 that is just flashbacks to Hellraiser 1. Which is fine. I love the first Hellraiser, so any more of that is good. And then we return to our heroine of the first couple of Hellraiser films, Kirsty, played by Ashley Lawrence, who is now in a mental hospital where she's being treated because she's trying to tell people about what happened to her family, the events of the first film, where her uncle came back from the dead with the help of her stepmother and a little bit of murder, and then killed her father and wore his skin. And then she got some help from some leather demons, and they wanted her as well, and she overcame them. And so, for some reason, the police and the doctors hearing this think that maybe there's something wrong with her. So she's kept locked in this hospital where there is a doctor, Dr. Chenard, who is particularly interested in her story. And we learn that the reason he's particularly interested in her story is he is particularly interested in the series, one of the main symbols of the series, one of the main recurring elements of the series, which is the puzzle box. And he's very interested in stories behind that, and he's been searching for these things for a long time. So he makes sure that she stays with them, and he gets his hands on some of what was left over at her parents' house, resurrects her stepmother with more murder, and she puts on somebody's skin and is back, and with his help, they open up a gate to hell and start to expose the people in the mental hospital to it, and it becomes its own sort of horrific, fantastical land. Kirsty and a young girl at the hospital, whose name I'm forgetting. Tiffany. Kirsty and Tiffany, who's the one who opens the box. She's fixated on puzzles. They venture into hell, the labyrinth that is hell, in order to try to retrieve Kirsty's father. Instead, they encounter Pinhead and the Cenobites and her uncle, who's still just hanging out in hell, not getting off, because that's what they do in hell. They're like, look at all these ladies you could have sex with. You can't have sex with them.
That's my favorite scene.
It's a good scene. Like, it's a good setup. Like, that whole, like, the women writhing under the whatever that is, the backlighting of it, it's a really cool set piece. The Doctor ends up becoming one of the Cenobites, although sort of separate from them, with the help of Julia, the stepmother, and he goes on a little rampage through the hospital, treating people with these this claymation again, snake things that come out of his hands. And then Kirsty convinces the other Cenobites to help her by reminding them that they used to be people. And they fail. And they all get killed and turned back into their people parts, or the people things that they were before. Ultimately, Kirsty and Tiffany overcome the evil Doctor turned Cenobite and close the door to hell and escape the mental hospital together and live happily ever until the sequel.
Well, at least until Hellraiser 6, Hellseeker, because we know what happens to Kirsty there.
I think she ends up pretty happy after Hellseeker, because she wasn't exactly in a good marriage there. Like,
no, I mean, absolutely. And this is not an episode about Hellraiser 6 Hellseeker, but as you know, Sean, I have a lot to say about that film. As
you could also take the pivot of going with the Clive Barker written comic book series from a couple years back, where they pick up Kirsty's story instead.
That's probably a better pivot for all of us to take. I'm just saying
she becomes Pinhead at one point. They like trade places.
Does?
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool. Like,
that is really cool.
It is.
You know, I love a lady Pinhead.
I mean, like the original Pinhead, maybe. For example, but we can get into that about the source material versus the cinematic material. But Sean, what are the connections between Return to Oz and Hellbound Hellraiser 2? Because I can't imagine anybody listening who hasn't seen both films would have any idea based on those two synopses. Should I tell them? You mean
those two synopses that why don't tell them what could this be?
Well, I mean, both films do play with the setting of young women sent to hospitals because their caregivers don't understand them, and then they are taken away to fantastical places. And also, I just feel the need to note that these are both sequels to hit films in which the protagonists are institutionalized for telling those closest to them about what had just happened in said hit films. And then they're also helped by little blonde white girls named Ozma or Tiffany.
Exactly.
So
what's the name of Ozma's quote real world version again?
I don't think she has one.
That's right. She's just the little blonde girl in the real world.
Yeah, she's just the little blonde girl who's like, they're keeping them apart because obviously everything there is up to no good.
Ozma is Tiffany.
Yeah.
And
Kirsty is Dorothy.
Kirsty is Dorothy, and TikTok is Pinhead. And
I don't think so. I wish. Like, I love that.
the Gnome King is obviously Chenard. Like, that's exact. Like, that's a straight.
The Gnome
King is
Mombi. Who is
what?
Queen Mombi?
Oh, that's Julia.
Probably.
Oh, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mommy. Yeah.
Exactly.
There you go.
The whole mommy thing's going on there. And Chatterer is Pumpkinhead, right?
Kind of because of how
Chatterer
we learned
was a
that
little
Chatterer
boy.
was a child. That was
Yeah,
and like,
Chatterer's
I've
a little
seen this
boy,
movie
Pumpkinhead's a little
before.
boy.
I should have remembered this, but I was just
During
like,
that, I'm always like, what the fuck
kid.
did that kid do?
I was just
He
like,
wanted to
damn.
explore the pleasures of the flesh. That is what he
know.
wanted
Me
to
as
do.
a kid.
He sought out the pleasures of the flesh, and then he.
Though? I want to see that comic like origin story. I was very
I don't know that
disturbed by
his
that.
specific one is in there, but I know the Epic comics from the 90s.
I can see that you do.
They had like a whole bunch of like other like Cenobites that they did origin stories for, and there's some weird fun ones in there. One that's strongly suggested to have been Lon Chaney, I think.
Interesting.
There's some fun weird ones, but I don't think they did the Chatterer.
I just want to know about the Chatterer. Also, that's one of my cat. Is she still on camera? I don't think she's on camera right now. Glimmer, Chatterer. That's one of her many nicknames. Because sometimes when she's watching birds, she makes these sounds, and I'm like, yeah, you know. I'm like, oh, you're being the Chatterer Cenobite, which is part of why it was so disturbing to me that then he's a small child. I'm like, I've been nicknaming my cat after like something traumatic that happened to a small child. This is just so wrong and terrible.
Well, now hold on. Like the Cenobites are devotees of hell. They're not necessarily victims.
Right.
They sought it out, and then they're religious zealots. They've
we
chosen
can't get
their
into
path.
this age of consent conversation right now, Sean.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Look,
we can't
I
do
mean,
it.
I don't know.
can't.
The thing is, too, is like that might be true for the first film, but the second film, it kind of like they start off as like esoteric sadomasochists, and then like it becomes a slasher franchise.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So
This
it's
is a
almost
disappointment we all share. I believe,
Yes.
not to make too big a statement, but I think
No, of
Absolutely.
course. And also, I mean, I have my episode on the podcast about Hellraiser, but I was also on another podcast called Corpse Club, where we talked about every single Hellraiser movie.
Oh, I will have to check that out.
Yeah.
I will have to check that out.
And,
Okay.
It's just that the second one, the mythos changes. Like, I don't know if they are devotees so much as in the second one, they're sort of being positioned as being like punished for they're like seeking out this great mystery. Like it almost is like a punishment. At the same time, when Shenard turns into a Cenobite, which is a really gruesome scene.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, exactly. It completely slaps.
It's what you want in a fucking Hellraiser sequel. Like.
Exactly. But that's like pleasurable to him almost. So it does play with this idea of like it's a punishment, but it's also pleasurable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it had this problem of like it really works being vague in one movie, but then when you have to make two movies, you have to solidify, or you make more stuff. You have to solidify the mythos behind it, and unless you have a really clear idea of what that's going to be, it becomes the mess that you get with the rest of these movies, or the mess that you get with the Halloween movies, of which there's like 7 timelines for the Halloween movies now.
Oh, that's a huge fucking rabbit hole we could go down.
Yeah, but it's the same thing of like we have this idea, and this idea works. Okay, we have to build it out more, franchise it. What does that turn into?
If you built it out
it's a hard
more,
thing to
it would
nail.
just be it's hard to build it out more, because if you were to properly build it out more, it would just have to be sexier.
Yes.
Which they obviously weren't going to do.
Right.
Unfortunately, because what is good about this franchise, really?
Exactly. Yeah. It just becomes about the violence, when really the first movie is about the combination of eroticism and violence.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of loses the eroticism part. They
definitely just jettison that at a certain point. For sure. Should we talk about
Let's talk
all
about
of our general initial
reactions.
Yeah, before we talk about critical reactions, what were our
Sorry,
reactions to each of these films? Sean, co-host of this program.
Do you want me to start?
I don't know. Sure, you can.
I can't remember when I first saw Return to Oz. I think I saw it on basic cable sometime in the mid 90s, not realizing that there was a Oz sequel, other than that at that time there was also a lot of like Oz related TV shows and cartoons and stuff like that, because it had just entered the public domain. And I remember seeing it then and thinking that the Wheelers were pretty creepy. And then watching it again more recently within the last like 4 or 5 years, I think. I think I was working on a fantasy script, like a fantasy adventure type thing. So I was looking at a lot of sort of the peak of those movies, which was the 80s. So I was watching this one and really kind of amazed by how good it was for how little people talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And also how creepy the Wheelers were, like just how much they creeped me out at the time. Hellraiser 2, similarly, I think I caught it on base and the first Hellraiser on like basic cable, like the Sci-Fi Channel, like late at night, sometime in the mid 90s, when I was becoming sort of more of a horror fan back then, and which is how I caught up to, like, I originally started getting into most of that stuff. And really got into the first couple of Hellraiser movies. At that point, there was only, I think this was right after Bloodline came out, and the last of them would be released theatrically. And I got really into those. And I think Hellraiser 2, mostly because it was the only one I could find, was actually one of the first DVDs I bought for myself at one point. Like around like 2000 or something like that. But I'm a really big fan of the Hellraiser franchise, and I've tried just about everything related to it. Like, I've watched all of the movies, as terrible as they get, and I know each new one is going to be worse than the last one, but I still will watch it and be disappointed. I've read many of the comic book related stuff related to it. I'm like halfway through the Scarlet Gospels, which is his book sequel, really not to the original novella, which I've read, but more to like Hellraiser 2. This movie, I think, is more of a sequel to like the movies. But I'm really enthusiastic about these films. They're as terrible as they get. Like, I like the whole mythology and the look of everything, and I keep hoping it'll be good.
It never is.
No. It's not. Annie,
how about you,
do
Annie?
you feel about these films?
I actually remember very specifically how I saw Return to Oz, because I think I was about like 7 or 8 years old, and my friend told me, I was at her house and she was like, "Oh my God, this is my favorite movie. Like, it's so scary, and blah, blah, blah." And we watched it, and I thought it was terrifying, but I also wasn't the kind of kid who was like turned off by that. So I really liked it, and it became kind of one of those movies I would think of even later on as something that was like for kids, but actually really creepy, and maybe not actually for kids. And I sort of put it under the category of like Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, like any of those really puppet heavy movies. Oh, and Legend too, that is like for kids but actually really dark.
Tim Curry.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And I feel like movies like that were for kids, like their intro to horror. Like people who became horror freaks like really like those movies. And with Hellbound, I know I saw it in high school because when I watched Hellraiser, I immediately was like, give me all of this. So I watched it pretty immediately after the first one. And I think once I loved that Julia was more present in the second one.
Yes.
And I think that is what redeems this the most as a sequel. And then I remember like watching the third one and being like, all right, this is getting bad. So I think I stopped, and then it wasn't until I got older that I watched the rest of them. But yeah, that was my experience with those movies.
That's beautiful. And for myself, I also saw Return to Oz at a very young age. I saw it in the movie theater when I was 7 when it came out. I am older than the other people in this podcast, and with my entire family, I am super old.
You're super duper old.
So you're about like 10 years older than me. That's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's just no.
Like I saw it when the movie was like 10 years old.
I saw it when it was
kind of having parallel experiences.
Yeah, well, they were very parallel experiences, actually. So I saw this in the theater with my whole family. I was like, this is amazing. As I told Sean before, I was kind of a budding movie geek. And this was one of those first movies that I became aware of the fact that it was critically reviled. And I thought it was amazing. And I was just like, what the fuck though? Because honestly, like this original Wizard of Oz that you're all fetishizing is fucking weird. It stars an adult who's pretending to be a child. And I'm an actual child here who like want, and like that. I like the original Wizard of Oz so much more now as an adult than I did as a kid. Like now I can appreciate what it's doing and all of that and Judy Garland and blah, blah, blah. But at the time I was just like, this is weird and kind of like makes me uncomfortable, basically. And this, like Return to Oz, it was scary. Like, yes, I was scared, but that's part of what I liked about it, because basically what Annie just described was 50% of my childhood in terms of pop culture, which is like, yes, this terrifies me. And also I like it. So, let's see where
the original Wizard of Oz, like you said, I like it more now as an adult. But when I was a kid, I was like, this sucks.
Right?
It, like,
I
makes
thought it was
me
boring.
sick. Yeah. It wasn't even that it was boring. It like something about it like made me sick. It was just so like perky and
it was perky, and it was a full-grown woman pretending to be a young child,
and it's
something
dark,
about
and they're pretending it's not dark.
Yes,
is the other. I was like, this is dark as shit, and it's like this happy musical. At least the second one, like it's dark, and it's dark.
They're just like, oh, this is fucked up. We all know, like this is fucked up. So when I saw it, like Return to Oz made me feel so much more just like present and able to engage, and like yes, it was absolutely terrifying, but that's okay. One of the nice things about film is it's a safe way to engage with things that are scary. That can be a good thing for children and adults as well. And it's funny because I was telling Sean earlier, Return to Oz is actually a kind of landmark film for me in that it's the first film I can remember seeing a listing in a newspaper for the fact that it was coming out on VHS.
Ooh.
I don't know if my family owned a VCR at this point. We might still have, but we were like early VCR renters. Like we would go rent a VCR and then rent a stack of VHS tapes, and that was heaven, basically.
That's cute.
Yeah. And there were very limited VHS tapes available also in my town. So we saw a lot of films again and again and again. But at a certain point, like we did buy a VCR, and I was like, fuck yes, we've got a VCR. We can watch movies in the house. This is amazing. And Return to Oz, one of my favorite films, was coming out on VHS. And I was like, oh my God, it's $100. I can't buy this.
Wow.
We can't buy, because this was pre-ET. This was like price to own VHS. And so it like wasn't a thing. And I was like, okay, so I've just got to wait till it comes on TV and then tape it off TV, which is exactly what I did. And then watched it again and again and again, like after taping it off TV, but being like, fuck, I can't buy that. And like, then when the price to own thing happened, being like a game changer of like, if something came out that you wanted to see, you might be able to actually afford to own it. Because Return to Oz was definitely a film I wanted to watch again and again and again. And still kind of do. We'll talk about it more as we get into it, but like I fucking love this film.
Sorry,
yes,
it wasn't pre-ET. Did ET's like VHS release come out a lot later or something? Because ET came out a couple of years before.
I would buy that.
Oh, I know, because it kept coming back to theaters. I saw ET in theaters.
Okay,
like, a couple
so
of
that's.
No, they didn't.
I was having a moment
ET.
of confusion about it for the because you were like, oh, this was pre-ET.
Right? It was
80. Yeah, it was like
pre-ET
82.
VHS
Yeah.
release. They held out on the VHS release for a long time. This was like a historic VHS like marketing
release thing. Okay.
Yeah. No. Yeah. No. That didn't come out till like the late 80s.
Okay.
I
Cool.
believe, or maybe even the early 90s. It was
that makes a lot of sense. I was just having a moment of confusion and like let's clarify
the
before.
film came out. I saw E.T. I could tell you all my horror origin story about my grandmother forcing me to watch that after I repeatedly
E.T.
said,
is the scariest. That's some bullshit.
I don't want to see this movie.
That we have to pretend
I don't fuck with that movie
for some reason.
I don't want to deal with that movie.
Scene,
He's scary. I don't want to deal with it.
My anxiety. I was just like, oh my God, I want to leave. And my grandma's like, you are not fucking leaving. Like, we are going to sit here.
Meanwhile, you're like
E.T.
happily sitting through Return to Oz.
Exactly. Because that, like, because E.T. like takes you off guard, but that will be a different.
Well, E.T.'s also trying to ask you to make the scary thing like, no, he's lovable, and like, no, he's not. He's terrifying. I'm just gonna eat somebody's face or something.
He might be lovable, but he's still
maybe,
terrifying.
but like he's not being not terrifying in that. Like he gets drunk at that one point, and I'm like, he's gonna fuck somebody up. I don't know what's going on here.
It's true. Speaking of lovable and terrifying, Hellbound Hellraiser 2, I did not see until I was an adult. I was weirdly late to the Hellraiser franchise, and actually listening to Annie's episode on Girls, Guts, and Giallo kind of like hit on some of what, like, I think I had an idea in my head when I was a little younger of like, oh, this is a movie where they're like, S&M is scary, basically. And I was just like, like I'll watch it when I get to it. And then at some point I got to it and was like, oh, that's not what this is at all. Like, this is a movie about somebody who actually knows what they are talking about. This is not, I've never seen Dee Snider's Strangeland, but what I imagine Dee Snider's Strangeland is like.
I've seen it many times.
Is that what it's like?
Kind of.
I don't remember it very well. I think I ended up getting pretty drunk when I was watching it. I just remembered I used to watch, I used to listen to his radio show, and I was listening to his radio show like around the time he was making that movie. And so I was like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And then a few years later I saw the movie and I was like, it's not really interesting.
It's not. And also I bought a cameo from Dee Snider for my mom for the holidays last year because she used to live in the same building as him.
Oh, that's fun.
And he remembered her. So that's my.
He seems like the type that
story.
would. Like, he's.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, he made like a sex joke about her. I was like, he's a scumbag.
Oh my God.
He's exactly. Because my mom is a twin. And her twin sister used to live together in this building, and they would take their laundry into the elevator, and Dee Snider would be there with like his friends, like all decked out, and they would be like, the laundry twins are back. So they were always like harassing them. So I was like, do you remember? I said in my message to him, I was like, do you remember the laundry twins? And he was like, of course I remember the laundry twins. They were always doing an inordinate amount of laundry, especially sheets. So I was like, okay. He's exactly what you think he is.
I can imagine his voice saying that too, which is great.
Right. Yeah, it's uncanny. It truly is.
And Strangeland is not good.
That's what I've heard.
I mean, but it's also really funny. So
look, I'm not saying I wouldn't watch it if it was free and in front of my face. If it's on Tubi, I will watch it, but I just am not gonna like make a point to like make an effort. But I should have made an effort earlier for Hellraiser, because when I eventually saw Hellraiser, I was like, oh, this is a fucking great movie. And then I saw Hellraiser 2. This was like, I don't know, in the 2000s streaming or something. And then I saw Hellraiser 2 and I was like, oh, this is a really solid sequel, actually. That's like building on the mythology, and like I'm super into this. And then I saw Hellraiser 3 and I was so very disappointed. Because
I do like the guy with the drill head, though.
Sure, I mean, Hellraiser 3 has things,
some good Cenobites.
Yes, it does, especially when you see what's coming, which I did, because I have seen every single Hellraiser sequel since then.
Oh, I have now too. Yeah.
So you know, especially about the last two, which are the ones. The last one, especially. There's a lot I could say
with
about.
Chunky Pinhead. Don't get me wrong.
No. That's the penultimate one. Chunky Pinhead is the penultimate one. The ultimate one is the one where people kind of like the Pinhead more, but I was angrier because it's the one where it was just like, here's like some people vomiting, and now some naked ladies are gonna sort through the vomit because that's what we all want to see. And like, that's, you know, like, no offense if that's what you want to see, but that's actually not what I want to see.
No.
Like,
made by
all.
people who don't super understand S&M.
And there was the angel, and then there was the ending. That I just am so offended by by Hellraiser Judgment. Like,
yeah, Hellraiser Judgment is like the most religious one.
What the fuck? Like, that is not the series. Well, this is perhaps.
And also, if you're gonna like say like, okay, hell has this one particular aesthetic, like, why do you have to be that lazy with heaven? Yeah, it's some blonde lady wearing like a white
But she was
thing.
glowing.
Yeah, but like at
there
least
was
like
light,
it's
white
directed
light.
by like the guy who directed it is also one of the guys who like works on the makeup effects things, which is why they had so many of those stupid makeup effects things. Because he just was really into doing that. It's like, do it with the freaking like angel as well.
But she was a beautiful white lady. She's an angel. She was blonde. She had wings. What more do you want?
At least, I don't know, give her like an extra ass or something. I was gonna say extra boobs, but like they've already done that in a lot of like, that's in Total Recall.
Extra
like
ass
you've already
was
got the
so
3
much
boobs.
better.
Extra ass.
I really appreciated that.
But it's not gonna be where you think.
No, of course not.
It's on the
Cenobite.
abdomen. Cenobites.
So we got a little bit sidetracked, and then we took a quick break. And when we got back, we somehow got sucked into a conversation about how Sean has a good voice for radio, which led to what you are about to hear. And I would just like to say in advance, I am sorry. Enjoy the rest of the show. Just follow your dream right through that labyrinth.
Drive time radio. No.
There you go. Oh, God. Maybe that should be our next podcast, Sean. Maybe we should try to do a drive time radio.
Like a fake radio show.
Welcome to Drive Time Radio with Sean and Nicole.
We're
driving with you at Drive Time
and get caffeinated and something else.
We just make up news stories.
I just like talking in that voice. I don't know what I'm saying. I'll just say random shit in that voice because I clearly can't come up with the content. But if you can handle the content, Sean,
you know what? How about this? I got one. How about you do the Karen James on Hellbound Hellraiser 2 review quote you pulled in that voice? Because I think it's time for us to talk about critical and audience response to these films. And Nicole, I think you should present to the world your drive time radio voice and read the glowing review, perhaps not, that Karen James gave Hellbound Hellraiser 2 in the New York Times.
Can I then also maybe share what our friend of the show, Janet Maslin, said about Return to Oz?
Yes, you should also then. You don't have to do the drive time voice for that one because it's shorter, but for the long one, you definitely have to do the drive time voice the whole time.
Copy that drive time voice that I apparently just came up with for the whole time of Karen James on Hellbound Hellraiser 2. So Karen James said in the New York Times about Hellbound Hellraiser 2, you might find Hellbound Hellraiser 2 provocative if, and only if, you badly want to know what people look like after they've been stripped of their skins by evil powers. As it turns out, they look very much like walking, talking candied apples with a shiny red coating that covers their entire bodies. The effect looks sillier than it sounds, although it's meant to carry a slight sadomasochistic erotic thrill. Miscalculating what might be titillating for most human beings is just one of the problems with the sequel to Hellraiser. The film drops its plot whenever a fake-looking monster walks on the screen. Ogling strange creatures is the film's true reason for being, or raison d'etre, as you might say.
You might.
And that's what Karen James said about Hellbound Hellraiser 2. in the New York
I don't know
Times.
what this slight sadomasochistic erotic thrill is all about. There's nothing slight about it.
The whole movie.
Yeah. Also, I know quite a few people who are horny for skinless Julia. So, I just think she's wrong.
She's wrong
Absolutely.
there's more about how she's wrong as we get deeper into this. But yeah, I think so. We all agree it's wrong. We all agree that the effect looks even sillier than it sounds. I'm like, I thought that effect looked fucking great. I was
It's
like,
the
I will
best
watch
effect
this
in the
all
series.
day.
What do people want? I thought it looked great.
These are amazing practical effects.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's historic.
Yeah.
And also, some of us, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time, like, have a special feeling for practical effects as opposed to more recent, visual effects that are done digitally. And I think, like, both Hellraiser, the first two Hellraiser films at least, are absolutely high watermarks for practical effects.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you care
I'm
about
actually-
that, like,
I'm actually
here you
writing an
go.
erotica right now about a practical effects artist. So,
Ooh, there you go.
obviously, I
I mean,
feel
if
strongly
you were
about
writing
it.
anything about a practical effects artist, really, it would have to be an erotica. Like, how could it not be? It's such a...
Yes.
It's just, why couldn't she have just said, this is an S&M film and that's not my thing? I understand it was like 1988, so like maybe that was not a thing that was going to happen, but like that would be fine.
I mean, critics
But-
also just don't do that.
No,
No.
that's true. They
No,
don't
they
do
don't
that
do
today either.
Listen, I would rather a mean review than a milquetoast Twitter review, the kind of
Always.
shit that we get now. So I'm
Yeah.
okay with the mean review. I would rather some feeling than like, I don't like this, but like what you like. Like, okay, obviously we all like what we like. Like
Everyone has a different
I'm not-
opinion.
Yeah, I'm not 10. I don't need people to reassure me that it's okay that I like what I like. So
Yeah, but a lot of people are 10.
I know.
Some of us, though, before we were 10, liked Return to Oz, and we're like, oh, the people who are paid to have opinions on film all think I'm wrong. And yet,
Right.
okay, like that's a useful learning experience. And
you know-
that did not stop
No.
as
You-
time went on.
One of those people was Janet Maslin. You know what Janet Maslin said about Return to Oz, Nicole? Do you want me to tell you what
Can
Janet
you tell
Maslin
me
said?
what we've talked about things Janet Maslin said about surviving
She comes
the
up-
game? I remember she comes up a lot because she
comes up a lot.
I don't know, maybe because she wrote for the New York Times in like
Perhaps.
the 90s and 2000s and 2010s.
And we look at a lot of those
when-
movies.
We do.
So she said the work of on Return to Oz, the work of ingenious technicians who seem either not to know what gave the original film its magic or not to care. Children are sure to be startled by the new film's bleakness. This Dorothy, who has nothing like the spunk and resourcefulness of Judy Garland brought to the role, is nonetheless cast as a conquering adventuress in an alien empire. All of that is just wildly inaccurate.
What did Ebert say, though, Sean?
Well, Ebert, this movie is amazing. It starts out with Dorothy being left overnight at the house of a strange person, question mark.
What? That didn't. That was
She's
my
given shock
editorial.
treatment, and then she's swept away in a flood by the time the movie is half an hour old. Kids are... And then Siskel was also part of this, I guess. Terrified, he said. Siskel said the kids are terrified.
I couldn't find an Ebert solo review. I
full-
could only.
So
find.
this was just on their
This was on
TV
Siskel
show.
and Ebert. They both gave it thumbs down.
And they
He
were
did
both
not
also
like it.
incorrect.
They
'Cause
were.
it's
Much
also
as I love
fantastic.
Ebert, he is often incorrect, especially about scary films.
Yes.
Not always, but often.
Yes.
What did Ebert say about Hellbound Hellraiser 2, though, Sean?
Hellbound Hellraiser 2 is like some kind of avant-garde film strip in which there is no beginning, no middle, no end, but simply a series of gruesome images that can be watched in any order.
I kind of love that. Like, it
sounds
I don't,
hot.
I don't agree, but
But I would still watch whatever he's talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was not watching about the film. He was not writing about the film we watched because he doesn't seem to be aware of the fact that Julia was in it. or that Dr. Channard was in it. Like, his whole review makes no mention of any of these major characters who drive the entire plot of everything that happened. So I think he maybe kind of checked out early on, was just like, no, this is not for me. And just like, when you do like,
yeah, and like back
coma,
then there was no screeners. Like, you couldn't just like watch it again. Like, you had to go, like, he saw it in theaters and probably fell asleep and was like, well, I guess I'm writing this review now.
He was like, no, thank you. He didn't like Hellraiser 1 either, is the thing. Like, he didn't, like, he was not in for this series. So I have, like, given the review he wrote of Hellraiser 1, I would imagine he came to this one just like, okay, like, not even going to get my snacks for this one because I'm just going to check out and catch some Z's. And, you know, God bless Ebert. Like,
he's at least consistent, right? He doesn't really go for the horror movies.
It's
no,
maybe
he does like horror. It's just that he's very, like, this could be a whole separate episode of the podcast, but he loves certain horror. He gave like Halloween 4 stars. He's like, Halloween, cinema, this is it. Halloween 2, he gave like half a star and was like, this is just fucking disgusting. What is wrong with you sick people? Like, he has his lane when it comes to horror. And it is consistent in a way, but you have to, you know, a lot of it he does like. It's not that he doesn't like horror. It's not that he doesn't like franchise horror. He does like a lot of it. It's just like there are certain lines that I think he doesn't, like, it's not for him, and he's unable to imaginatively identify with how somebody this might be for, unless they're an absolute monster. Which, my take on it. In
fairness, I am a monster, and I
mean, look at who's here today.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
That's fine. I didn't say Ebert was wrong.
I mean, maybe it seems like a series of nonsensical images if you were like asleep.
I would think, I honestly
in and out of consciousness.
I can absolutely imagine falling asleep at this movie and like waking up periodically and thinking I got the movie. Like, right. I could see that for sure. You know, and there are a lot of images that you could kind of play in whatever order, but also, is that a failure?
Isn't that like the conceit of film? Isn't that like the conceit of editing as a concept?
Yeah,
like,
just we should just do a re-edit of Hellraiser 2. That's what we assume Ebert thought he watched.
So, in terms of other critics, like Ebert and the various Karen James and Janet Maslin were not really off per se. Like, they were not off the beaten path in terms of critical response to these films. On Rotten Tomatoes, Hellbound Hellraiser 2 is currently rated 50% fresh by critics and 58% fresh by audiences. To note, as we always do on this show, Rotten Tomatoes came to be after these films are released, so sometimes Rotten Tomatoes scores are less representative about older films that since they were released may have had a critical, renaissance of one sort or another, where people are like, oh, this was trashed upon release, but now, like, we all recognize it's a classic. I kind of feel like that's a pretty representative Rotten Tomatoes review for Hellbound Hellraiser 2, honestly, that it's like 50% fresh critics, 58% fresh audiences, and then Return to Oz, similarly, on Rotten Tomatoes currently is 54% fresh with critics and 71% fresh with audiences, which I think just is because it's on Disney Plus right now. So parents put their kids in front of it and are kind of like, this has better production values than some shit I put my kids in front of. So, like, yeah, B film or whatever. Yeah,
I think it also had a basic cable life and one of those HBO movies in the 90s and the
it's also
2000s.
It's right, but that was all pre-Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, no, but what I mean is that like people then came up a little bit older now, remembering it from then, and have since watched it more.
Yeah, sure.
Release. Yeah.
Didn't Hellraiser fans like Hellraiser 2 when it first came out? Like, I would think actually so, yeah. Audience response for people who actually saw that shit would probably be higher than 58% fresh at the time, and maybe now just because people are fucking haters. And it's like, oh, it's Hellraiser sequel. I say thumbs down because, whatever.
It's the only good sequel.
Well, I do have a soft spot for Bloodline, I have to say. I'm not saying it's a good sequel.
Is that I get them all confused.
That's
Is that the one
Pinhead
you were
in
referencing? Pinhead in Space. Okay, yeah.
Adam Scott and Pinhead in Space. That's all you need. Like, and I'm just like, you know what? This was butchered by Miramax. Like, but there was at least some stuff here that I wanted to see, and I did enjoy Adam Scott. Just like he went all in on.
It's like a bootleg Event Horizon.
Yes, but like I will enjoy a bootleg Event Horizon. So I enjoyed Bloodline Hellraiser 4. I think I gave it 4 stars, not 4 stars. Oh my god, I think I gave it 2 stars on Letterboxd because I'm like, you know what, Pinhead in Space is worth a star for me. So,
absolutely.
You know. I like it better than the third one.
Yeah.
Third one doesn't have Pinhead in Space. It has a little more competency, but it does not have Pinhead in Space.
Yeah. So. I like the all 4 the first 4 ones that went on theatrical. Like, I don't think 3 or 4 are nearly as good as 1 and 2, but I still really enjoy them. I think probably because of when I watched them. When I was younger. And I mean, I partly like 3 because the main actress in that is in Star Trek. So if it's got a Star Trek connection, that bumps it up for me a little bit. So
it still has great practical effects.
Yeah.
The third one,
like
which I think is why I still enjoy it.
I will watch it again. The third one, the first 4 I will watch again, and the 6th one I will also someday watch again, even though that one is worse.
It's
box office and awards. Well, Return to Oz was released in theaters on June 21st in 1985. As I said, I was 7 years old. I saw it shortly thereafter, I believe at the Pyramid Mall movie theater with my entire family. It performed poorly at the box office despite my entire family's contribution, and grossed only $11.1 million in the United States against a $28 million budget. I mean, to be fair, we all know that's kind of bullshit because it's like, how much money did it make on home video? How much money? But whatever, going by box office gross, it made less than half its budget back despite having the most, perhaps famous editor in the world directing it. And it received mixed reviews. Critics praised the effects and performances, and as I recall from my own research, the costumes and that sort of art department stuff quite a bit, but criticized the dark content and twisted visuals. However, it performed well outside the US and has since acquired a cult following. It did get an Oscar nomination for Best Visual Effects. It also got nominated for some other awards. It got nominated for the Saturn Award for Best Fantasy Film, Best Performance by a Younger Actor for Fairuza Balk, and Best Costumes for Raymond Hughes. It was also nominated for Fairuza Balk and Emma Ridley, who played Ozma, for Best Starring Performance by a Young Actress and Exceptional Performance by a Young Actress, respectively, at the Young Artist Awards, which apparently did not last very long, as this is the first time I've encountered them. This podcast.
They should bring that back.
They should bring that back. It's like when you see a kid give you're like, oh, this isn't great. They got a kid to say their lines and it wasn't too cringy. They actually gave her performance. Absolutely, we should be celebrating that. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 was nominated for Saturn Awards for Best Horror Film and Best Supporting Actress for Clare Higgins, and it won Best Music by Christopher Young, and it was also nominated for the grand prize at the Avoriaz Fantastic Film Festival, as well as the International Fantasy Film Award at Fantasporto and Best Film at the Sitges Catalonian International Film Festival. And also, just as an aside that I apparently felt the need to put into this show outline, Hellbound Hellraiser 2 was initially rated X by the Motion Picture Association of America. I think a distinction shared possibly only by The Exorcist, a film we also discussed previously on this podcast, which would have limited, viewers to those 17 years of age or older. That was appealed, I assume. And Clive Barker attributed this original X rating initially to the explicit displays of the grotesque in Hellbound Hellraiser 2 rather than just hinting at it, which, to be fair, yeah, there's a lot of explicit displays of the grotesque in Hellbound Hellraiser 2. X rating, that seems a bit much to me, but, you know, I'm clearly not in the MPAA. So, Annie, Sean, thoughts on all this?
Those are certainly things that happened.
I mean, I'm not surprised by Return to Oz. I feel like that just to me is an indication that it's good. Like, if it's not like slop that mainstream audiences can like shoehorn down their throat, it's not gonna do as well. So, you know, that makes sense to me. It's a movie that gives kids credit.
That's a huge yes.
Yeah, as like autonomous viewers that have like intelligence. So that in and of itself is like a controversial thing. So it's kind of, as somebody who studies controversial film, I would consider Hellbound controversial for having received an X rating. And I would say that that's kind of another way they're linked, because I think it's also pretty controversial even still to make a dark children's movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's even more controversial now to make a dark children's
movie. In the 80s, you're right. It is even more controversial now.
All the movies you mentioned earlier, Annie, like fucking Labyrinth and Legend, and I don't know if you said Dark Crystal, but Dark Crystal and all this shit I watched when I was a kid. Now it's like, how could they have let kids watch that? And I'm like, it's exactly what at least some kids want to watch.
The 70s and the 80s, like how, like some of the things that they were figuring, like they're trying to solve, like what do we like what's for children, are just bizarre. Like my wife and I tried to watch the movie H.R. Puffin stuff, and I was so disturbed in the first 15 minutes that I was like, can we stop watching this? Because
is it from the 70s? Is it from?
Yeah, it's from like the early 70s, H.R. Puffin stuff. I didn't watch the show. My wife used to watch the show, but the movie was on Netflix like 5 or 10 years ago, and we tried to watch it, and I was just like, this is fucking me up right now. I can't watch this.
No, all that shit by those people is fucked up. I used to watch that shit. I used to watch Land of the Lost, was the main one I watched, and also Electra Woman and Dinah Girl, which was kind of less fucked up, a little more kitschy, but that was the same.
But
I like people that. Kind of Land of the Lost was scary.
But people kind of forget that there's this whole thread, and a lot of it got into the movies in the 80s, but just some of the TV in the 70s for kids was
creatives were doing drugs.
Yeah. And
it wasn't as much about making money.
Right.
You know,
but and also who was making money? People are making money like Jim Henson, who was like, all right, have I got something for you? This is going to work great for kids, and it's going to work great for adults who are high as hell. And that's what we're doing here. And everyone's like, okay. And then I mean, how much have we gotten out of that winning formula? Which was a winning formula. Like, absolutely.
It was.
And it's sort of a interesting thing. And then this, of course, gets transformed by the marketing people who get their hands on it and say like, no, we've got to put it in the little marketing boxes. Because before it gets popular enough, before it starts making people money, like real money, like it, you know, they go off and they do whatever they want, and they come out with all the things that we mentioned, and then people go like, oh wait, we can sell stuff we can sell some toys, we can sell some other stuff. Like, okay, now we have to we got to squeeze it into these, we take this, squeeze it into things, and then all the kids stuff becomes like, oh, we can't do that for kids because that's too scary. Kids don't like scary. Like, we don't want to scare kids because like 4 parents made a phone call one time in 1996 about things being scary. Not just that though,
but the Christians getting organized for all
morality in media.
Yeah.
And COSC, which that's how they exist now, but they used to be morality in media. That was their big thing. So they're always on it. I mean, they were the Catholics were just protesting Benedetta.
I can't
yeah.
wait.
I know.
I gotta see that. Yeah.
I
gotta see the trailer for that. I still want to watch the trailer for it. I keep like hearing about it and going like, oh god, I gotta watch the thing for that, and then forgetting.
It's pretty sexy.
And now we can discuss what do these films, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, and Return to Oz, what do they reflect about one another and the audience watching, as I'm told we discuss on this show?
I mean, I think
pathologization of women's mental health.
There you go. Yeah.
I think that was the big one that when we were initially thinking about doing this, we started with Return to Oz, and we were like, that's what we were talking about. Oh, we should do something that like focuses on like, as you said, the pathologization of women's mental health. And
also, I always want to talk about Return to Oz. Let's be real.
Totally.
I always want to talk about Return to Oz. So.
And we were like, okay, so that's what it would be. So what other film will we talk about? And then I think I texted you like 3 months ago, and I was like, oh, we should do Hellraiser 2 with it, because they both do that.
And I was like, oh, yeah, obviously. That's obvious. The only thing that would have been...
realizing just how like almost the same they are in a lot of ways.
Right.
They're basically just a like younger and like for older audiences and for younger audiences version of the same fucking movie, honestly. Yeah, the only thing that would have potentially also worked is in watching Hellbound, Hellraiser 2. I was like, oh, speaking of films we've already talked about briefly on this podcast, this would also make a great double feature with Labyrinth, like, as they are very similar as well. But I think the Return to Oz, speaking of other films I saw with my entire family as a child in a movie theater and then was obsessed with, but I think Return to Oz does pair better in terms of specifically like the pathologization element, right? Because like in Labyrinth, she gets to bet her baby to the Goblin King and like it's all fine. But in Return to Oz, Dorothy Gale gets taken to a mental, I don't want to say hospital, I think that would be too charitable, to a place, to a mental health place, not a stranger's house as Ebert referenced it, which I thought was...
He didn't watch this movie.
That happens. Well, it's the same thing actually in his Hellbound Hellraiser 2 review, where he says something about Kirsty's parents being flayed in the previous Hellraiser, and I'm like, her parents? Like, Julia's not her mom. Like, that was very clear. Maybe not to you, God bless you, Ebert, but like, you know. Yeah, so... yeah, Return to Oz is very similar to Hellbound in that like at this mental institution where she's not like institutionalized in the way Kirsty is, where it's like we're checking you in and we don't know when you're getting out. It's like she's specifically brought in for electroshock therapy, but also clearly her aunt and uncle don't fully understand what that is. They're just like,
they're simple farm folk.
They saw an ad in the newspaper.
Yeah.
They're
being taken advantage of.
They're being taken advantage of. And they want to help their kid who... one of the things that's interesting about watching this film as an adult is I do have a lot more empathy for her aunt and uncle. Yes. I'm just like, oh, yeah. Yeah, your niece Dorothy is suddenly like, yeah, I went to Oz with the flying monkeys and there was a witch and then I tapped my ruby slippers. And they're like, okay, honey. Like, you know, your uncle already can't finish this barn because, like, he's an alcoholic and we've got enough problems going on right now on this farm that's barely subsisting. No. And I can't blame them. I can't blame them. I can blame them a bit for taking her to like electroshock therapy, but only a bit because they were taken advantage of, you know? Like,
yeah, I have a lot more empathy for them in this viewing because I have now turned into an adult. So it's like I was talking about the movie 13 for my podcast on my Patreon, and we were like, okay, we went from being the main characters to the parents, because now I watch this movie and I'm like, oh my god, protect these kids. Like, right. It's a completely different viewing experience as an adult. I'm not one of those people who thinks that children's media should be like made with adults in mind, because I think like kids should be able to have their own things. At the same time, I do think what distinguishes like a great work of children's art from crap is if you can watch it as an adult. You watched it as a child and you watch it as an adult and you take different things from it, and it like kind of reignites your inner child. Whereas like I watch something like a Pixar movie, and I'm sure there are some good ones, but I'll watch something like a crappy Pixar movie and I'll be like, it's not just for children, like it's baby slop. That isn't challenging, isn't beneficial for children's like artistic mind. Like it's just entertaining for them. Whereas films like this are art.
And also so often then like the adult element in that will just be like pop culture references or something like that, where you're like, whereas like Return
dirty
to Oz,
jokes
I think
that go over the kid's head. Stuff
exactly,
like
which like no offense to dirty jokes, but Return to Oz actually
that's
functions.
The kind of stuff I hate. Like Return to Oz just functions, like you're saying, as a children's movie and a movie for adults.
Exactly.
It's in a pure way.
Yeah, and it's very organic. It's very just like, oh, adults who actually can empathize with children, as opposed to some of the critics that we were reading earlier. Like that's what blows my mind so much, is so much of the negative critical response to Return to Oz was supposedly in the name of the children. But what about the children? And I'm like, I was the children.
They loved it.
And I loved it. I was like, it's not for everybody, but like, one of the great fucking things is, maybe if you're not in the movie theater, that it is kind of hard. I have had that experience too. But certainly on home video, which let's be real is how like the vast majority of children have seen this film. If it's too scary for you, you can turn it off.
Leave the room, yeah.
My niece was watching something the other day. I don't remember what it was. I wasn't there, but like, she got too scared and her parents were like, okay, we'll watch this later.
Right.
And turned it off. You can do that. That's the thing. You have that power as a viewer, even as a child, unless your parents have somehow stripped it of you. And that's part of what's so great and empowering about scary movies, is you can engage with them on your own terms.
Yes.
Well, and I think that's something that people need to be sort of taught to a greater degree. I think a lot of people have lost track of that or weren't allowed to do that at some point. Like, and because you get a lot of people like responding to things like, oh, I've got to watch this, or I've got to watch like these great movies or something like that. Or I have to finish this book that I started, which is always one that blows my mind because I'm a slow reader.
Do they?
They don't, but I've talked to people like throughout my life where they're like, yeah, I started this book, I don't love it, but I got to finish it. Like they're like,
I do that, but
I don't understand that. I quit a book in like 5 or 10
so
pages.
I'm like, whatever. Yeah.
Like if I'm not into a book like right away, it goes over there.
I mean, like, look, I do that too, but I'm also aware of the fact that I don't have to. Like I know, Sean, I think you and I have talked about American Psycho, for example, which is a book that I like.
I like it too.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's the word, but
it's the only Bret Easton Ellis book I've been able to finish. The other ones I was like, I don't need to waste my time. That one I like. I have a lot to say about it. But I was very aware while reading it because at first I was like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And then it got bad and I was like, oh, this is really bad. But you know what I could have done? I could have stopped reading it. And I chose to be like, I actually want to bear witness to whatever this is and know it, because that's what I personally want to do. And I did. Right. And then I was like, you know what? If I reread this book, I think I'm going to read like the hilarious, like Huey Lewis in the news sections and stuff, and not some of the graphic torturing women parts. I think I might skip those if I reread it. I read it this first time, so I know what it is. Like, I understand what it's doing. I never need to read that again. But the fact is, I never needed to read that the first time. Lots of other people read that book.
Yeah, and I just think that there is a thread though of people among people of that, like, well, we have to consume certain things. Everybody's talking about it, everybody's watching it, everybody's doing it, so they want to be part of the conversation, or they started it, so they have to finish it. yeah, I think people need to sort of embrace that they can just not, or that they can just stop, and that is a perfectly valid thing to do.
So I
you had a question.
I looked up my question because I thought this would be interesting. So this, I didn't know if you guys knew this, but Return to Oz is actually based on the original Oz books, which is probably why it's so dark.
Yeah, like two different ones, I believe.
Yeah, it's based on the second and the third one.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like a combo.
Yeah.
So in the second one, a little boy Tip escapes from his evil guardian, the witch Mombi, with the help of a walking wooden figure with a jack-o'-lantern head named Jack Pumpkinhead, which you have to think Tim Burton stole that, right?
Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
As well as a living sawhorse. Tip ends up on an adventure with the Scarecrow and Tin Woodman to help Scarecrow recapture the throne.
Mm-hmm. That's the overall plot of
right. And then in the third one, while traveling to Australia with her Uncle Henry, Dorothy is swept overboard with a hen named Bellina. They land in Ev, a country across the desert from Oz, where they encounter the Wheelers and make a new friend, the mechanical man Tick-Tock. They meet Princess Ozma, who is in Ev, to attempt to save Ev's royal family from the evil Gnome King and finally return to Oz. So it's a combo.
Yeah, so it's just a mashup of those two books, basically.
Yeah,
which is like also, so all that source materials in the books of this like supposed classic literature that we're drawing upon, that children were supposedly reading, as well. It's funny to me that a film that in some respects seems a lot truer to its source material than the original film just gets beat up so much. Like, even with the pedigree it has, right? It's not like this is some like upstart film.
It's
with
Walter Murch, friend of the podcast.
Like friend to editors, the editor.
You want to read a book everywhere.
Want to read a book about editing? It's going to be by him. So
in the blink of an eye.
Just given to me by my high school editing teacher when I graduated high school. In fact,
nice.
The copy I have.
Nice.
And I didn't know
I think it's
until
because
years later that I was like, "That's who directed Return to Oz."
What I know,
I keep forgetting.
Yeah.
I think it's either like the only thing he's directed, or he's only directed like one other thing as well.
Yeah, he hasn't done much. He has done a couple other things, but
he did a great job, Walter.
He did do an excellent job.
Fucking great job. That movie moves right along, keeps going. It's bleak, but like if you're up for that, when I was watching
definitely an editor's movie.
Yeah, Yeah, although it's funny watching it and thinking about thinking about it through that, because you're just like, it's one catastrophe after another, like occasionally broken up by like some lunch pail trees,
right?
Yeah,
or something. It's like a pretty minor uptick before it's just like, then it's this sequence, then this sequence, then this sequence of just like sheer terror,
and it dives into deep mommy issues, which.
Such a deep. Sean and I were talking before. I think it was yesterday or something. We were on the phone for one reason or another, and he's like, the Wheelers, and I'm like, yeah, the Wheelers are scary, but you know what's really scary to me is Mombi. Like, Mombi is
dark mommy, who's gonna take your head
when you're old enough.
Yeah, she's gonna lock you in the tower until your head is ready.
And then when she goes and like steals the like animating powder, when Dorothy does, and all the and it's like headless Mombi chasing her and grabbing her while all the fucking heads in the Hall of Heads are screaming, "Dorothy Gale!"
Yeah.
What the fuck? Like, that is, I mean, and I say this with all respect and love, like, that is fucked up. That is so fucked up, and it's so beautiful. It stuck with me. And that's art.
It's very artful. I mean, I'm thinking of yet another movie like this, The Neverending Story.
Mm-hmm.
These were dark kids films. I mean,
The Bog of Eternal Sadness.
Right, exactly.
That scene?
fucked me up for years.
All of us. It's a fucked up scene. It's a fucked up scene.
I didn't
but you
see
know
it until I was an
else it
adult,
is?
and I didn't care. Sorry. I actually,
Well, for some,
I'm like the only person who's like, I don't care for that movie.
I'm not even saying it's
Story.
a good movie. I'm saying it's a movie I saw a lot as a kid, and like that.
I don't know why
shit
I didn't.
marked-
Yeah.
I don't know. It was on cable and stuff. It was just like I remember watching it at my grandma's house. I remember like it was just
it was always on.
It was just always on.
Yeah.
And it was funny because as a kid, it was a movie that bugged me because the only female character is the one, I forget her name. The
princess, right?
Princess lady. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was always kind of a bummer because I'm like, just could there be like a girl who's part of the adventure at all? No, because it's the
Return to
early 80s.
Oz. That's
Exactly.
you get that
There you
movie.
go.
Yeah.
Why do I love this movie so much? But similarly, like the Neverending Story, the like Bog of Eternal Sadness thing, that's one of those things people are also like, this is too intense for kids. And I'm like, or is it helping kids learn to cope with really difficult stuff? Or is it things that we're all going to reference now as we get older and it's like helpful for understanding, like helping friends through depression, for example, or all sorts of other real world things that's just an analog for in a kid appropriate way.
Right. And like beyond, I'm trying to like personally get away from like, is art helpful or not? Because I feel like that like we fall into these traps of talking about like positive representation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like even beyond this being helpful to kids, which I do believe it will be, it touches you and moves you and makes you feel things and gets you excited about the world and art. And that's always worthwhile to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like,
it shouldn't have to do more
feelings.
Than that.
Right.
Yeah.
Activate something. That's absolutely. And to what we were all talking about, I do know that according to our research, Return to Oz was conceived of after a Disney brainstorming meeting to come up with ways to just use this Oz property
Right.
that they own, being like, we got to do something with that.
Because it was about to enter the public domain, and so they're like, we've got to try to find a way to leverage this before everybody can, because it's one of the few things they couldn't lock down and keep forever.
And we were reading a Screen Crush article about like, Return to Oz, dark movie for kids or whatever. And like one of the things that they brought up that I thought was interesting, albeit I took issue with, was they were kind of pointing out in this article that like, it's easy to identify with Dorothy, even if the world of Oz was a fever dream or a way for her to cope with the trauma of a tornado that destroyed her home. The point is that her needs aren't really being addressed and no one is listening to her. And then, which I do agree with, but then the writer goes on to say her stories about Oz could be an indication of a vivid imagination, the symptoms not of a mentally ill child, but a highly creative spirit. How many of us were eccentric kids whose parents thought the best answer was to ditch us with a therapist when we said something weird? This might be a generation gap thing in part, but that has nothing to do with my childhood experience. I was certainly not ditched in front of a therapist.
No, my parents were like, therapy?
Therapy?
Why would you need therapy? We feed you.
Might say stuff about us there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't
not my experience. No.
Yeah, that wasn't a thing.
Not.
That wasn't
it.
Was... But I'm like, this is one of those things where I'm like, okay, so is your article for a very specific subset of a potential readership here, and you're just maybe not aware of that?
Homeschooled kids?
Yeah, because I'm like, who is this?
I mean, yeah. That's who that's
like,
gonna be.
I'm older
right?
than both of you, but this wasn't anybody I knew.
No. I'm 31, so there's a
Yeah.
pretty, I mean, maybe for people younger than me, I don't know.
I was just kind of like, really? When I read this, when they're just like, how many of us? And I'm like, I don't know how many of us, because I don't know any of us who that happened to. So
I mean, if anything, my experience is more being deprived of mental health resources.
Yep.
And being gaslit that my depression or whatever was an active imagination. So that I can't relate to that at all.
Yeah, I was genuinely like, are we in Bizarro world now? Because this is the exact opposite of my experience. Not that my experience is universal. Maybe, there are kids who get brought to therapy, but I'm like, how many kids are really brought to therapy where that's a bad thing? Like, I'm sure that happens. There are terrible therapists, all of that, but like, because I'm kind of like, what's this like binary between highly creative spirit over here and mentally ill kid over here? Because I've got news for you. That's the same kid.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
And therapy can be helpful, even if you're not at a crisis point. Like, it can also be counterproductive for sure. But
yeah. And I think that also speaks to the complicated nature of therapy and all of that, and how both of these films interact with that, because they're both accurate in how they treat it. It's also not something that should then be used to dismiss the value of that, right? Like, it's definitely been a very abusive practice. Institution. That's the word I was looking for. It's been very abusive over the last centuries. I guess century and how old is it now? Century and a half, give or take.
Oh, fuck. Time.
Yeah, something like that.
It's not a thing.
But I mean, it's definitely been very abusive, but at the same time, it's also very useful. And so I think there's a certain degree to which looking at these from the perspective of what you were saying, of that Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are understandable, and they're like, we don't know what to do here, we would like some help, and they're being sort of convinced by their ignorance of the situation, and by this man who's kind of selling something that is, not well tested, is an actual, treatment that exists and has still been used, to my knowledge, up, and I think it's still used, but I know it was used as recently as 20 years ago.
But it's like voluntary now.
Yeah. I had a friend who went through it in high school. It was interesting seeing that after the fact. But yeah, like, there's like these two sides to it, but it's definitely abusive in their experiences of it. And even Kirsty, like, she went through a very traumatic event, and it's reasonable to suggest to her that she should talk to somebody, but not the way that they present, not the way it is handled, certainly, and not the people that she's brought to. There's that double-edged sword to therapy.
Yeah, and it's interesting with, like the events of the Hellraiser films, I think they're pretty clear-cut. This happened. The Cenobites are here, like, this all happened. Both The Wizard of Oz and Return to Oz are a lot more ambiguous in terms of what actually happened. And there's a supportable read on both films that, like, none of that happened. That was, like, Dorothy's coping mechanism fantasy, which I think the films kind of work equally well, either way you take that. So in a sense, like, in theory, Dorothy getting some sort of mental health help would not necessarily be a bad thing, because even if all of this is true and she really did go to Oz and then come back, like, that's a lot for a kid to deal with, like, in theory. But there wasn't mental health help for children at that point that could possibly deal with anything like that, in a way that in theory now, if you have access, like, I don't know, there's a lot better children's mental health care. But instead you get things like these technological fixes, like the electroshock therapy machine that has a face on it, and that's why it's not scary, which is what makes it so much more
He has a little tongue you can slide around. It's so charming.
As a child, I was just like, what the fuck is this? There is nothing comforting about this. What the fuck? Get her out of here.
He's your friend. And he's got
Fairuza Balk is so good. And I take a lot of umbrage with that review that she's, like, not a strong character or whatever. Like,
What film were they watching?
Right. Yeah, I think she's great in this. I think she's so likable and so acts like a child who has been through trauma because she's like adultified. She's very, you know,
which is part of what's so weird about critics being like Judy Garland in the first one, and like no disrespect to Judy Garland, like all respect to Judy Garland and everything she was going through and all of her talent and all that, for sure. But as a child watching this material, like that's very weird watching like Judy Garland's infantilization in The Wizard of Oz versus
it's perverse. It's much more perverse than a child playing a child.
It's infinite. And I picked up on it as a kid. I was like, this is making me uncomfortable. And then I watched Return to Oz where I'm like, oh, here's a child playing a role that's the age she is. And she's, you know, this works for me. And I think it's a great kid performance. I think she does a great job. It's like, has a lot in it that we would come to see in some of her later performances. I think a little bit of that Fairuza Balk spark, you know, in like Gas Food Lodging or The Craft or whatever later on. Like as a kid actor, she was so self-possessed and like had something that I certainly responded to. And I think it's hilarious that adult film critics were just like, no, this scary film, inappropriate for children. And I'm like, you are like strapping down a full-grown woman's breasts and it's not working.
Yeah.
Like, she, and I'm just like, how old is she supposed to be? Like, what? You know?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, I think, like I said, I think Fairuza Balk does such a good job of being like an adultified child. You know, even when she's in the facility and she's like, why do you need to strap me down if this isn't gonna hurt? You know, like
so
she's
you don't fall off.
Yeah, exactly. Why she's like, creepy. Why would I fall off? Like she's very smart, and it also shows in the way that the Jack Pumpkinhead character starts calling her mom.
Yeah.
You know, that really hit home for me as like an adultified child. So I think that a lot of kids would connect with that who are having that experience. I know I did. I was very like fascinated by this pumpkin calling this kid mom. And I didn't quite understand why I was, but it was like, this is a child without a mother who has a mother figure, and this is like a creature who doesn't even have a mother. And the way she falls into the role and like accepts it and comforts him, like when they're falling out of the vehicle in the sky, and he's like, yes. I'm sorry, Mom, and she's like, it's okay. it can't be helped now. That's exactly something a mom would say. So right. Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many mommy issues in Hellbound too. I mean, it's very heavy on the mommy issues.
Yes, which is part of such of the disappointment of the rest of the franchise, because it's like we could have had this Julia figure as the big bad for the rest of the Hellraiser movies, and
love Clare Higgins.
She didn't want to do it, which like
she was like, I'm over this.
Which fair. Like yeah. I can't hold that against her, and I'm glad that that's the reason we didn't get that, honestly, because otherwise I'm just like, if only like, but like the dynamic between her and Kirsty is such a compelling horror dynamic of like the bad stepmother and the, you know,
evil stepmom, mommy.
Yeah.
Mommy. Yeah. It's the adult realization of these primal fears that are explored in Return to Oz.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think that I don't know, as much as I would have preferred that Julia was recurring, like even if they'd gone as far as to just recast her and just like, oh, it's Julia, she's just wearing somebody else's skin this time, which would work in the mythology of the films. Unless it was always Kirsty versus Julia, they'd have to reestablish some dynamic with whoever they were continuing the series with. It would almost been better for them to find a way to explore something similar, like okay, the first movie, we've got this sort of family dynamic, and we have the wicked stepmother thing, and we've got this that extends into the second movie. Okay, what's something else we can do that's just a very relatable conflict, something that many people are going through, that then just gets blown into fantastical horror proportions with some people with pins in their heads and some people without eyes and some weird guy with sunglasses for some reason. I don't know why he needs sunglasses in hell, but he does.
Something was done to his eyes, so they're super sensitive now.
He's
Like
super
stripped
sensitive.
away.
Isn't that, you're talking about Butterball? Doesn't he have
Yeah.
no eyes behind that? That's
I
why
can't remember.
he has like his eyes sewn shut.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah,
Because
it's-
there's like a gif of him taking off his glasses where it's like, "Rrr."
right, and he's got
such
none of them.
the
I like
gif
that
is stuck
sound
in my
effect. That was good. That's good.
But yeah, I think it's I think it's a real missed opportunity with that franchise of looking at it outside of like the Cenobites as a backdrop, not as a focus. Like it works so well in the first movie as a haunted house movie, and like any good haunted house movie, the real horror of it isn't necessarily the literal ghosts, but the sort of the figurative ghosts of all the troubles it brings up in interpersonal relationships. And
Yes, and unlike some very popular supposed haunted house movies recently, it also isn't trying to cover up some of that real horror that comes out of the family by displacing it onto ghosts and demons. Not talking about the Conjuring series.
not at all. We're definitely
I was
not talking
just
about
trashing the Conjuring series yesterday.
I mean, you can talk to me or Sean about the Conjuring series and hear what we both have
This
to say
is
about.
this is a Warren's hate podcast. So I passionately hate those people.
Yeah. No, they suck.
It's
Yeah.
disgusting. Much more disgusting than skinless people.
For God's sake, more skinless people are beautiful. You know?
Skinless people
I
are
think
beautiful.
Julia looks beautiful, skinless, and when
Absolutely.
she kisses the doctor,
It's hot.
yeah.
I like
is.
it. There's also some really beautiful cinematography in Hellraiser 2 when she's like in the gown, when she's skinless in the gown, but with
And
the
it's
gauze.
blood coming through. Yeah.
And there's like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
one handprint on the wall. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is cinema. This
You
is
can
It
tell
has-
that
it has a
Clive
very
Barker
Bride
was
of
like still
Frankenstein
involved with
vibe,
this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bride of Frankenstein too. Yeah.
And it also
Yeah.
reminded me a lot of Goodnight Mommy, which of course,
Yes,
mommy
very
issues, many years later with a lot of bandages and things. And I was like, oh yeah, this is a good look. So you
See,
know,
And that's what the Hellraiser movies should be like. They should be more like Goodnight Mommy. You should take Goodnight Mommy, and then at the end, the Cenobites show up. That's what Hellraiser movies should basically be. It should be
kid
people
supposed to be
fucking with each
Cenobite.
other. Yeah,
that kid from Goodnight Mommy should be a Cenobite. Honestly,
he's the Chatterer.
That's his origin
There you
story.
go. We've solved it. Goodnight
Now I
Mommy
know.
is
Got
is
it.
the
Okay.
is the origin story for the Chatterer. There you go.
Cool. I buy that.
So-
I like that. That's canon. Everybody, this is now canon. I
We've
don't want to hear
solved
about
it.
it.
This is
Mhm.
this is who the Chatterer is.
Mhm.
But I hadn't thought about Goodnight Mommy in regards to this, but yeah, that totally has that same the bandage thing has that same vibe to it.
And also the whole like bad mommy idea, right? Of
Yeah.
like the maternal figure gone, which is what Goodnight Mommy, its whole thing is playing off of like, is this the mommy I can trust, or is this something gone bad, and how will I know?
I mean, it Return to Oz, it's like very profound on that level because Mommy has different faces, right?
Yes.
Like, sometimes Mommy is good Mommy, sometimes she's bad Mommy. Like it's
And if she takes off the head, she forgets things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That whole, honestly, that is what maybe stuck with me more than anything else in the whole film, is like the mommy concept and like that relationship. Definite, like, can't imagine any reasons why this might have resonance for me. There are none.
Right.
Just so everybody knows,
I
none.
definitely
not at all.
wasn't fetishizing it.
How
Right.
could you?
I definitely wasn't, because there's a child in that movie. But if I was, would be a really good mommy girl inspo.
When she first shows up, and this was another moment where I was like, Labyrinth. I was like, this is like Bowie, not
the
Mommy.
canonical daddy girl movie.
Right.
Labyrinth, yes,
Right.
and this is the mommy girl version.
But when
Basically.
when we first get introduced to Mombi, and she's like sitting there on that like fainting couch or whatever, wearing a costume that really looks like it was just a leftover from David Bowie's wardrobe from Labyrinth. There's like these like tall feathers coming out of like the shoulder. She's like playing some sort of like archaic medieval instrument, like not a mandolin, but something like a mandolin or whatever. And I was like, this is like glam rock, like just there's a lot happening there.
Yeah.
And it's just something I've returned to time and time again as an adult. Like just stuck with me in a big way. Yes, Sean.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say not in the same way, I think, but I definitely, Mombi is hot, like her normal head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just speaking of like children's fantasy films from the 80s, she's also the evil witch in Willow. The evil witch queen in Willow.
That's another
who also
one.
has a conflicted daughter relationship.
I've been meaning to rewatch Willow for reasons. That's another film I saw.
Because it's amazing.
I don't think I saw
good.
that with my whole family. I think that's when my sisters and I saw it just with my dad while my mom was staying home to have time alone.
I want
the
to
rest of us went.
rewatch Willow, and I also, speaking of mommies, want to rewatch Snow White: A Tale of Terror.
Is that the one with Sigourney Weaver?
Yes.
Yes.
She's the evil stepmom.
I can't remember if I've seen that. I know I've seen the VHS cover of that, and like
It's
there's
good.
the creepy makeup on it.
I watched the like Disney animated Snow White not that long ago, which is like I hadn't seen it in some years and was like, fuck. Like it's for all my Disney problems, they make some very beautiful, scary animated films.
That's a great one.
Oh, yeah.
It's
The early ones had some
amazing.
terrifying villains. Like I remember being small, and they were still doing the theater re-releases of the old ones every once in a while.
Yep,
And
I would see them too.
yeah, like Snow White and Pinocchio came out. I remember the Evil Witch
Pinocchio
and Snow White
terrified
scared the shit
me.
out of me, and
Pinocchio's so scary.
Stromboli scared the shit out of me in Pinocchio. Like I was just like, I don't know what he's doing, but I don't want to be anywhere near it.
Turning kids into donkeys, that's what he's
Kids
doing.
like being scared.
They
so
do.
I don't just like adults do. And I think if the kid is still watching and fascinated, even though they're scared, that's okay.
Yeah,
it's
no, I
more
think
than
it is
okay. I think it's like, again, not that it's the responsibility of the film to have to be good, otherwise it doesn't deserve to exist, but I actually think it's good. Like I am so grateful to all the fucking scary ass films I saw as a kid. I don't know how I would cope with life without them. So like,
it's true.
you know, it's
I think Return to Oz is scarier than Hellbound.
Yeah.
For me now, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I still think that, like, even as an adult, but yeah, I mean, it's the psychological aspect of Return to Oz that I find scary.
Hellbound is more fun to me.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
It's more like,
thoroughly
ooh,
enjoy
scary.
it.
Like,
Ooh,
it's more
scary.
like,
Ooh,
ew.
Look at those beautiful practical effects.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Whereas, like, Return to Oz, like, they've also got some awesome practical effects, to be real, but
you're like,
conceptually, I was saying to Sean, I'm like,
dark.
It's not even like the top 5 scary things in that movie, but like, oh yeah, you'll get turned into an ornament. Your friends all got turned into ornaments. Choose wisely, or you'll get turned into an ornament. What does that mean? We're not going to tell you. You can just imagine.
It's also just the vibe. Like, it's got a very dark, we are not holding your hand through this feel to it. And Hellbound is like, this is a splatter punk sort of thing for the horror crowd. Yeah, like it's for horror fans.
We know what you want.
Exactly.
We're going to give it to you. And I respect that and appreciate it because it is what I wanted and I did enjoy it. But like, Return to Oz, like, in a lot of ways, like the Tiffany Kirsty relationship in Hellbound feels a lot more kind of safe than like the Ozma Dorothy relationship in Return to Oz. Because what the fuck is happening with Ozma?
It's
also
never really explored.
she's
She's just
mirrors.
hanging out in the mirror.
Yeah.
She's imprisoned. She was dethroned, and now she's in a mirror.
I was like, is this like Dorothy's mirror self or like
Kind of.
Yeah.
I think,
I mean,
and also
she
then
does get released when Dorothy's like, I wish I could be in both places at once.
Right.
Right, but also one read of this story is also that Ozma only exists as another institutionalized child who broke out in the big storm and then drowned.
Right. She's the
Like
kid
that's
who drowned.
that is
She's
one
the kid who gets
very
to stay in
legitimate
Oz.
and supportable read of this film is that like Ozma's dead. Like Ozma,
Kids,
for the
if you
rest of the
die, you
film,
get to stay in Oz. You get to stay in the
That's-
magical land of Oz if you die, kids.
That's how
Die,
Dorothy
kids.
dealt with that trauma.
Great.
Was creating Ozma, unrightfully dethroned Queen of Oz.
Right.
Who she's now
So
going
she
to
could return.
reinstall / bring back from the dead. Like it's a very
But who she also is. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like the your two selves, which is a big part of the whole Wizard of Oz thing.
yeah, like this self who at least initially also can get out of the place where they're about to give her electroshock therapy and escape. Like she needed this other girl to like be the one who could do that. It's a lot. It's heavy, but it's also like a lot that's fruitful to chew on and interesting to think about for children and adults alike. I think.
I
Critics
think so
disagree.
too.
I try to avoid thinking when possible.
The Leviathan will help you with that, Sean.
Exactly.
Then you
He's
just
gonna
listen to what
the little
Leviathan
black
says.
beam is gonna hit me in the head. I'm gonna remember some weird shit, and then like
You'll bring
I don't
order
know,
to the
be
chaos of the
overwhelmed.
flesh.
Exactly. I will bring order to the chaos of the flesh.
That's all
Or
any of us are trying to do, really.
The comic books had a really fun way of like, what the fuck does he want? What the fuck does the giant diamond in the center of hell want? It's a fascist that wants to bring order to flesh. What does that mean? We don't fucking know. It puts leather on stuff, hooks, whatever. Draw something. Man,
I'm
late
okay
80s,
with the
early 90s
Hellraiser,
comics
like-
were great.
I'm just like really okay with things not making sense. Like
Yeah.
I don't need the Hellraiser mythology to make any sense. I didn't need it in the first movie. I
Yeah.
just like to let things wash over me. Like
I agree.
it does. Yeah, it really doesn't. Like I don't care.
I like
It's-
to have something to like tool around within my own brain. Honestly.
Exactly.
it's more
I like to
fun.
guess. Yeah, and that's also what I like about Return to Oz is it's like very mysterious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
In
this
don't.
way.
They don't give you final answers. It's all
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they don't
things.
even really tell you how Oz got that way.
No.
No, it's just one terrible thing after. It really was intense when I was watching it. I'm like, okay, so now it's the deadly desert. Whoops, you can't touch that sand or you turn to sand. And now, oh, there's the Yellow Brick Road. Remember that from the first movie? Now it's all fucked up. Like, it was just one disaster after another. But it's
Also-
funny. Like, as an adult, that hits me more than as a kid. As a kid, I just accepted. It was just like, fuck, yeah, Oz is fucked up. And I was along for the ride.
Well, it's like perverting these classic images. Like it's one of the most famous films of all time. So there's something very subversive about like perverting it and making it dark, which it is originally dark in the books.
Even the
Yeah.
movie, like the flying monkeys and all that, like a lot.
Oh yeah,
of
the
that
flying monkeys
is-
were like, I think that was the flying monkeys are on like Bravo's 100 scariest movie moments. So people were obviously scared of that too when that movie came
Yeah.
out. I think it was also considered quite dark, even though we think of it as like very happy-go-lucky.
right.
Yeah. But 40 years and like people growing up with it, it becomes this unimpeachable like thing. And like you introduce something because it definitely overwhelmed like the visuals from it, the style from it, everything about it overwhelmed the books. Like they're not in the books, they're not even ruby slippers, they're silver. They made them red because they're like, we got to take advantage of Technicolor. Like, Disney had to pay MGM to use the ruby slippers in Return to Oz because they were like, we have to use the thing that's iconic, like the ruby slippers.
It was worth it though, because they
thing.
put him on the Gnome King, which I really did enjoy.
Which was great.
I did enjoy the Gnome King reveal. I think
these, and he does a little dance with them and everything. Nicole Williamson did such a great job with that. Mm-hmm. They did a good job casting Merlin. But
they're great performances across the board in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, let's be real. Everybody's great. TikTok's great.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's great.
And I think it just like some of the response to that movie is definitely goes to how certain reinterpretations of things can overwhelm the original text. So when you try to make something that's closer to the original text, people go like, well, that's not how that works. No, this is all dark and weird. It's not dark and weird. It's all glowy and everybody sings a song and there's tiny people. Like, that's not dark and weird. When the reality of the original books is a lot stranger. I mean, my wife has most of them, I think, and she has some old copies of most of them. And she's like, yeah, no, this one's really weird. And there's this whole book about some patchwork girl and,
oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And I mean, L. Frank Baum even had a production company for a while, and they made silent films of some of the books, which I think a couple of them are on, a couple of those silent films are on the Paramount Plus streaming service because they have a bunch of like weird things.
Oh, cool.
There's some interesting finds there, but we watched, there was like the Patchwork Girl of Oz, I think is what it was on the Paramount Plus channel. And
interesting. And
I think it is the one from Baum's company from back in the early 1900s. So there's a lot of interpretations of this came out even before the one that made it as famous as it became, and then that sort of overwhelms it.
And now it's Wicked. That's the thing. That book is also really fucked up and dark, and the musical is not. So there you go.
Yeah, we saw the musical a couple years back when my mom was visiting, and I haven't read the book, but my wife's read the books, and I was like, that was kind of fun and goofy, and she's like, yeah, the book's kind of darker.
So many orgies. There's like orgies with animals. Yeah, it's a crazy book. Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't know.
Why did they not put that on Broadway?
Can't imagine.
But that's like the same thing. Like, it's a dark ass text that was turned into like a very happy-go-lucky musical.
It's so wild to me how I feel like a lot of even the same audiences can really read. I mean, maybe this is a duh point, but like can read books that are so graphic and disturbing, but then can't handle like I remember when like the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that like series of books, I tried to read the first one and like couldn't get through it for a range of reasons. People I knew like who would never watch a horror movie, who would
like read that book.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess this is like a no duh point. It's the same thing as like true crime aficionados who are like, gore, no, but they will very happily like go through all the details of real life murders. Whereas I'm like, no, I have a line between reality and fantasy, and reality is not fun for me in that way. Like, me hearing about an actual person who got murdered is a super heavy thing that I'm going to take really heavily. That's not entertainment to me, but it's so interesting to me, like how what are seen as like very obvious cutoff points. Like, to me, I'm just like, wait, what? But other people are like, oh yeah, it's fine because it's just a book or something. And I'm like,
like, do you think that real people are getting hurt in movies?
That's the other thing. I'm like, we're all playing pretend here. Like, you know, sure, we could get into situations with less ethical sets and the questions with that and da-da-da-da. I mean, that's also the case for books. Like, there's people who get hurt in the production of books as well. Like any
there is a
art, it's
difference in how we process those, though. Like words on a page is one thing, and there's a level of removal reality. And the beautiful thing about movies is we kind of process them like we're watching things actually happen. Like we know that they didn't actually happen, but like
it can be, but I also think for some of us, like sometimes it can be like worse to read words on a page because our imaginations maybe are scarier than anything that could fucking possibly happen in a fictional film.
Yes.
And I think there's like I'm not saying you're wrong. Like you're right.
You know why I think people like books? Because a book is like more so telling you how to feel about the actions taking place.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like in its verbiage, in the way it's described, there are all these indications to you that
this is a bad thing.
Yeah, or
it
that
gives
the
you a lot of
narrator
inner
feels
world stuff too.
Exactly, and you can get into the subconscious of the people who are causing harm as well as the people who are receiving harm. Whereas a movie, like, you just kind of have to watch it, and you know there are those things in there, but you have to have the visual language to understand that.
And in some ways you can only process it like you would process if you were actually talking to somebody and not knowing what's in their mind just as much as reality.
Wow, we talked about those movies.
We did talk about those movies.
Did.
We should probably wrap up. Annie, do you want to just remind people about your podcast and how they can give you money? Because you deserve money. And they should give it to you.
They should. Yeah, I have a podcast called Guts and Giallo. It's a monthly podcast. I examine subversive and controversial film with various guests. I just had a 2-parter on Rosemary's Baby that came out, so you can get kind of an indication of the kind of things we talk about. And I also have a Patreon for the podcast, which is just patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo, where I do bonus episodes. And the most popular thing is that I do screenings for my patrons. So they can join me on my private channel and we watch films. I pick like a theme of the month and we do like a really deep dive into those films. And I give like intros, Elvira style, but with more like historical context and, you know, kind of like we did on this show, like what the critics thought about it, etc. So that's what I do, and people like it. So you should sign up if you like that kind of thing.
You should. I signed up again recently now that I have a proper job, and I'm very, very happy to be continuing to fund in my tiny, tiny way the stuff that Annie does. You put a lot of work into what you do for that Patreon and the group, and you definitely it's very impressive and inspiring.
Thank you.
Like to go like, oh shit, you're doing a lot. Like when we prepare stuff for our Patreon, we're just like, okay, we're not doing what Annie's doing because that's too much.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I do it like, full time now. Like you guys have other jobs. Yeah. So I wasn't able to do it this much when I was still working other jobs.
Should they follow you on the social media, or should they leave you alone?
You can always follow me on social media. I have no privacy there anyway anymore. So you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at girlsgutsgiallo, and I also have a personal Twitter page personal Instagram page, which is Fat Goth. That is FATGAWTH. So follow me on any of those. I'm also on TikTok, but whatever, as LesVampX, but I keep getting removed because my knockers are too juicy. So
that's true.
That's what they do on TikTok.
I know. I don't really post on there as much anymore. Yeah, and I also have like a radio show I'm kind of starting called Vampire Deer. So that's in all of my links that I sent you guys. So
we'll put all those links in the show notes and send them to random people. You know, we'll do our random email blast to people that says follow these links.
Yes.
Oh, Annie is delightful to follow on all, and her playlists are good. The ones I have heard, when you have been so kind as to share them, I've been like, oh, this is delightful mood music to just have on this weekend.
I'm so glad. That's exactly. Yeah. So Vampire Deer, I'm really I released the first episode, so we'll see if I keep doing it. But I think the next episode will be very special Halloween music set. So.
Yay.
Cool. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was so good.
Yeah, it was so great to be able to talk to you again. Talk to you about movies and stuff again.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
I'll come back anytime.
We will have you back. Thank you for saying that. We will hold you to it, so you may regret that you said that, but
exactly. Thank all of you listeners for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time.
Okay.
The Celluloid Mirror is a 4 Mile Circus production hosted by Nicole Solomon, that's me, and Sean Mannion. Our theme music is Twisted by Kevin MacLeod. You can hear more from Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Please take a few minutes to rate and review The Celluloid Mirror on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps other people discover the show. And if you have questions or comments about what you heard on the show or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at info@4milecircus.com or seek us out on social media. We are at 4 Mile Circus on Twitter and Instagram. Want more Celluloid Mirror and more from me and Sean? Well, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/4milecircus, where you will get early access to episodes of The Celluloid Mirror, as well as uncut video of our recording sessions, featuring stuff that doesn't make it to the final episodes, and access to our Discord server, Patreon-only events, and so very much more. To learn more about everything we do, visit us at 4milecircus.com.
I ended up in that hall of mirrors. There was another girl. She looked like me. Exactly like me.
What happens when the story dies? The evil is set free.
That'll do, Pig. I have to return some videotapes.